Well, hello, and welcome to the MillVet Podcast. Your podcast hosts are Brendan Aronson, Tim Shaw, and Bo Higgins. We are military veterans, entrepreneurs, and investors. But most importantly, we strive to empower military service members, veterans, and their families. We believe that all veterans deserve a career that fires them up, a career in which you can learn, you can earn, and you can build a world-class network. On this podcast, we interview civilian and military veteran leaders who are incredible founders, writers, thinkers, and investors. My primary goal is to inspire you to achieve great things. Let's dive into today's episode. Well, hello, and welcome to another session of the MillVet Podcast. I'm your host, Bo Higgins. For those that aren't aware of the MillVet is a company that is focused on helping veterans find roles, executive roles in the private equity and venture capital space in particular. But we also like to share stories of transition about veterans and talk about veterans in the veteran space. And today, I have the pleasure to be joined by David Harris, who has made the transition into the private equity space. And great to have you on board today, David. How's it going?
Well, thanks again for having me on. Just truly humbled to be associated with the previous guests, but I'm doing great. Really excited for our conversation today, Bo.
Awesome. Well, hey, I always like to kick off kind of to go back to the beginning. I know you were an Air Force Academy grad, and just curious, what was the influence for you early on for the military, or was there an influence for you to join the military? Was it random? Was it something that you had thought about since you were like 3 years old? I mean, what was your process for kind of getting into the military?
Well, it was definitely more random than not. I think we have a saying at the academy: the reason that you come is be different than the reason that you stay. And so I can kind of walk you through sort of that transition, because it was a lot built into that decision. So it mainly started for football. Funny enough, I wanted to go to an institution where I get the best combination of academics and athletics, and so that, funny enough, boiled down to the three service academies and Stanford. And so, after a while, matriculated it down to just the Navy and Air Force, and then just figured when I went to go visit Air Force, I really loved the mountains, loved the campus, loved the people. And another funny story about who was my host during that weekend, but we'll get to that later. And I just felt like this was the place for me to be, and not having any military really in my family, no one was involved in the military. I thought, like, hey, I could really get a great education, play some great football, and then on the other end of it, have a great job that I can then, grow into and move forward that way. And especially coming out of 2008, that was very very top of mind for me. Is like, hey, getting the job's going to be very hard in this market. And so I was like, hey, this would be a great way to kill all of those issues, with one stone. And then, but it's like I said, funny enough, that reason always changes, once you go to the academy and you actually join the military. And then it just became about, just service. It just became like, hey, I'm going into, the Air Force, the premier Air Force in the world, protecting, everyone, foreign and domestic. And so that was just something that was top of mind for me. Like, hey, I want to be the best teammate, the best airman that I could be to help serve the country. And and so that was sort of what got me, past that when I graduated from the academy. So there's always that different transition, no matter who you are or what, because playing football is going to get you through that 3 a.m. night where you got to study, but you also got to practice for 5 hours next day. So it's always a spectrum there.
Well, I wish you would have chosen the Naval Academy as a Marine, obviously, but I can appreciate the draw of the Air Force Academy. It is beautiful out there in Colorado. It's a gorgeous spot for sure. And it's funny, I went to University of Virginia, and I was a walk-on football player my first year. I wasn't very good in on the football field. I was really good in the fraternity house. I was not very good in the football field. So I found where I could be an All-American was in the fraternity house, not the football field. But I can appreciate the dedication and time commitment you have to put in to be a student athlete, and especially one that I was paying my own way too, so it wasn't quite the greatest deal, but I definitely can appreciate the sacrifices you have to make as a student athlete, and I know obviously at the Air Force Academy it's pretty rigorous. But what was again? What did you take away from your time at the academy, or what? Give me some insights of your time there, or kind of highlights of your time at the academy.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a lot. I think it kind of boils down to one thing one of my coaches told me, and it's kind of how I live my life as well. I remember, one day, people were upset. It was the beginning of the season. People were upset where they are on the depth chart, and he kind of feel in the room. We were watching film. He could feel the tension in the room, and so he kind of just like, hey, he turned off the film. He's like, hey, I just want to tell y'all something. He said, you know, no one gets what they deserve. If you got what you deserve, you know what you would be. You know what you would get. He said you would be in jail, or if you religion, you'd be in hell. And because everyone has flaws, and he said you get what you earn. And so, and that was like it always stuck with me when he put it that way. Is because you may think you deserve all this, you may think you've done whatever, you may work the hardest, but did you earn it? Like, did you work as hard as you needed to, or harder than anyone else? And so that was something I really took away from that experience at the academy. It was, you got to go get it. You got to go earn it. No matter what it is, whether it's in the classroom, on the field, militarily, it was, you got to put in the work. And so that was kind of what I took away from that, especially my last 2 years. I was like, hey, if I'm really going to get the most out of this experience, I need to put in the work to get that experience. And so that started with, it was a time where, if you were a student athlete, you maybe weren't as involved in the military leadership side from the cadet perspective. And so I was like, hey, I want to change that. And so then I became, a superintendent, which is the number one junior within a squadron.
Hmm.
And so, I was just like, hey, no one else really has done this. It's very few people on the team that's been that. So I was like, hey, I want to really, dive deep into this leadership laboratory that we, that they, that they call the academies. And so, that was a great experience. Ended up winning superintendent of the year that year. And I was like, hey, this is really interesting. I'm learning a ton. So then this was a little bit more sort of a stretch, but then I became a squadron commander, which you're in charge of 110 cadets within one of the 40 squadrons at the institution. While I was during football season, while I was the team captain, and that was a stretch. That was one of those 3 a.m., 4 a.m. nights. And so, but I mean, it's just those experiences you just cannot replicate. Honestly, it just taught me so much about leading, about how to manage people. Even though you're in this microcosm that is the academy, it's still the same real life lessons that you just learn. Just you have to be in those roles to learn them. And so I just came away from like, hey, anything that you're gonna want to do, you got to earn it. As my coach would say, no one deserves anything. And so I think that was a lot of what I got from it, and I use those lessons all throughout my military career, throughout the MBA, and throughout my the short time I've been in finance so far. It's it all draws back to the academy. So that's why I wear my ring pretty much every day. It's because hey, if I can get through that, I can get through anything. And so that's kind of how what I really took from the academy.
No, I love that, and I love that concept. If you do have to earn it every day, again, nothing's given to you, and I appreciate that just kind of that motto for life. And certainly, I think it's amazing, and stepping up and taking the leadership role as you did. I mean, I think about that all the time. The military is truly. I mean, you get a master's degree in leadership by being in the military. I talk about that. Being in the Marine Corps, certainly we focus on that all the time, but all the services, really do focus on that leadership aspect. And where else in the world at age 21, 22, you're in charge of 100 plus people? I mean, it's crazy that I mean, no one, you talk to peers in the civilian world, they're never in charge of 100 people, right? I mean, but you're doing that at age 21. I mean, it's and you can do it, and you thrive in it. But it's not, you're almost too dumb to know better. It's like, well, I guess I'm just doing it. You're like, I don't know, I can't do it. So you just get in there and make it happen. But it is truly sets you up for success later on. Because, like, to your point, you wear that reminder every day. If I can do this, I can do anything. Got to earn it every day. That's pretty cool. And obviously a great bedrock for you to build on as you moved on into your Air Force career, obviously. And so what was that like too? I mean, I don't know how it works at the Air Force Academy. I know the Naval Academy, at the end of your senior year, you picked the branch or picked the location. How did you decide what you wanted to do post Air Force. Man, I always assume most people at the academy want to go into be pilots, but maybe not. I don't. I mean, that's kind of in my
Yeah.
head. Like, about it's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go fly. But what was that process like for you as you were kind of winding down there and moving into your actual active duty phase?
Yeah, yeah. Funny enough, I was one of the very few that didn't have aspirations of being a pilot. Once I got there, it was almost sacrilegious when I told people I was like, "Hey, I have never seen Top Gun." When I got to the academy, so like, it was a big deal. But no, no, no. Oddly enough, I actually found I was an acquisition officer in the Air Force, and so I actually found out about this career on that initial visit to the academy when I was a senior in high school.
Huh.
And I was very interested in business and how that. Sort of combined with the public and private sector. And so going in, they told me like, hey, this is a job where a lot of the athletes thrive in. And we had a military liaison there that was a former football player. He was a major, and he was like, yeah, this is my career. And I was very interesting that he said it's like the business side of the military, and so it always stuck with me. And I was like, I wonder what that career field was. And then sure enough, when we got to junior year where you got to pick your career, and I was like, hey, that seems like something I would really be interested in to learn. How does contracting work? How do we go from an idea to an actual capability, and and everything in between? And so that was kind of my thesis. I was like, hey, I just want to do that. I think that seems very interesting, and it's kind of right up my wheelhouse. And so then that's what I picked. And sure enough, it ended up being just, I think, the perfect place for me for a lot of different reasons. And then to your point, at the academy, I think was another piece of this. Once we graduate from an academy, you get, what we call 60 days. The different academies call it something different. But the Air Force Academy call it 60 days, where you get essentially 2 months off of paid leave.
Hmm.
And so, so you have time to decompress from a very
Yeah.
stressful 4 to 5 years previously. But, during that time, I was very curious just on business in general. And I never had access to learn more, through practice. And so, what also happened, so I had this acquisition billet on the business side of the military. So that during my 60 days, I was like, hey, what if I took an internship, kind of learned a little bit more about business? And that was where I, had my first foray into finance, and had an internship at Farrow's Capital, which is a private equity firm, a lower middle market firm in Dallas. And so I just went back home to Dallas, and then worked out of this office, and just learned a ton about just business in general. And so then that then gave me even more excitement to go back into the 6 year acquisition career field. So I think it was this coalescence of just different things, that different interests that sort of came to a head, once I graduated. So it was a perfect job. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that
Yeah,
too.
no, that's really cool. I mean, it's interesting. I think that, I mean, obviously the career field you're in today, you kind of knew maybe not exactly where you wanted to go, but probably more than most, you had a feel for where you wanted to go, and utilizing the military as a way to make that happen potentially, right? I mean, and you did do that, obviously. I mean, I think for some folks, we think I think at least my Marine buddies, the idea of going to acquisition sounds horrible, but we know we need it, and we know the guys that do it are truly specialists, and they're some of the best in the business of doing it, because I mean, navigating a DoD system is not easy. It can be a nightmare, and you have to have the folks that have that kind of niche expertise, because there's not a lot of folks that, at least certainly in the Marine Corps, not a lot of folks that have that background and can do it. But it's great to see that I mean, even knowing that to do the internship, in those 60 days is pretty cool. And again, I'm sure you had no idea what that would lead to today, but but you were already doing the things then that you would be doing later on in life, in some way, shape, or form, which is pretty interesting to kind of have that, at such a young age, to kind of figure that out. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. So all right. So what are any highlights from the actual your time in the Air Force and the active duty side of the house?
Oh yeah, I mean it was. I feel like I had the luckiest career. One, because of the bases I got. I was in Eglin Air Force Base in Northwest Florida for 3 years,
Oh yeah.
and then got to go to DC for 2 years. But I mean, there's, and the acquisition bases are, they're pretty sparse and not in the most desired areas. But so I feel like I got pretty lucky there. But no, that first job was incredible. I mean, it was just the learn. It's my obviously the introduction to the military, like, hey, you learn, even though you're an officer, you're not in charge. I think that
Yeah.
they preach that to you, and so like you really learn that. And I'm like, yes, that the master sergeant, he's going to call you sir, but you're going to do what he says, he or she says. And so, or they said. So it was just a really good experience. And then, going into the second year, I think probably the biggest shift in my career happened. And once again, everything matters. Like, I had to lean on my experience I got from the academy because we had a new team that got stood up. It was like six of us. We just got a new major, and we're excited to get the team going. We had a very important piece of developing in this program office was developing the nuclear cruise missile that was replacing the legacy system. And so, we're planning out the engineering and manufacturing and development phase of this, which is it was about $5.6 billion phase we were planning out before it was 2 years before we got there. And so, very important, from a programmatic perspective, also from a national defense perspective. And then, boom, my commander gets deployed, he, unbeknownst to everyone. And so we're like, hey, we really don't have anyone to backfill the job at this time. So, like, Dave, you're gonna have to go run this for a few months until we can find someone.
Next
And
man
now
up,
I
baby.
just been
Next
on
man
first
up. Yep.
lieutenant. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I just been on first lieutenant, and I, got a team of five behind me. And so that was just an experience that, had I not, gone through those stretch experiences at the academy, wouldn't
Yeah.
prepare me for this. And so that just taught me so much about just leading when you're not really, you maybe not have the experience or the knowledge, but, just kind of leaning on your team. And so I learned a ton from there to then once we got someone who actually should have been in charge,
Yeah.
she realized like, hey, you did a really good job with this. Do you want to be my deputy? Which was something, once again, I was, captain major plus, and so I just got to sit in that seat for 2 years and just learn so much from all the senior interactions. We got to present to the two-star that was in charge of it. And so that experience really, helped me understand like, hey, this is what you need to do. And then once again, I got in touch with the Air Force Academy, former football player. He was like, hey, your experience lends itself well to go to the National Reconnaissance Office, which once again would not have got that opportunity had it not been for my experience with the Nuclear Cruise Missile Program Office. And so I got a job at the National Reconnaissance Office where, day one, I got put in charge of two programs, and it was about 80 people within the program that I was developing. It was about $150 million worth of development that I had to actively deploy. And so, and once again, I'm still a first lieutenant at this point,
Yeah.
and so, which you're 24ish, 25, as you have all the responsibility. Once you just lean on everything that you've had before, and that really, and I remember the second day, someone sitting in was like, "Hey, we got this $500,000 contract action that we need you to sign for," and I like walked over to my commander, and I was like, hey, like,
We
what do
good?
we do
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
this? And he looked, he was on the phone. He was like, sign it. This is your program now. And so you just got to take that in heart. Okay, yeah, I am in charge now. You got to, trust the people that you have, and then you move forward. So it was like from day two, I was like, all right, I guess we're running.
All right.
These are
Let's
my
go.
programs.
Yep.
And so that just taught me I mean, once again, it's so much more. By the time I, left that program office, I started at two programs, ended up at three. I was, grew the programs from 150 to 250 million. We grew it from about 75, 80 people to 150 people in those programs. And so, just I think you just learn so much, managing that level of development, that number of people, that amount of money at that age. It was just so many life lessons that I think it just built up like um, this knowledge base where I was like, hey, I think really would see how this works on the private side, and
Yeah.
that's what kind of led to me applying to the NBA. But it was just such an amazing experience that all drew back to, hey, being a squadron commander at the Air Force
Yeah.
Academy, in charge of 100 other cadets, not really knowing what's going on. And so
Yeah.
it's just very interesting how those things in life where you just you earn it every day, but it just builds on itself.
Yeah, I always call it just you're always adding tools in your toolbox.
Yeah.
Because I think I make the analogy often. When I got in the Marine Corps, my leadership toolbox was probably a hammer. That's all I knew how to do was like yell at somebody. But over time, when start dealing with civilians and dealing with other services and dealing with just government agencies, and you can't just it's not like you can say, hey, do it this way and give them the knife hand. You have to figure out how to lead in different ways in different times 4 different people. Because again, I remember, checking into the headquarters of Marine Corps, going to, by the time I was at SOCOM, a bunch of older civilians working for you. That's not Lance Corporals, it's not E3s, that are working for you, that you can, it's a whole different way of leading and a whole different way of getting things done. And I don't know that everyone is great at adjusting to that. Some people only have that one tool in the toolbox for their whole careers, and they don't do very well. But the ability to kind of learn and grow and learn how you can continue to grow as a leader and invest in yourself, and also just to see how you can to motivate people to be successful, because everyone's a little different and everyone's a little different in their career, and you can't just do the same thing cookie cutter. You have to adapt your style to make your team successful, and obviously put yourself last and taking care of your people. But I always found, and I'm sure you the same way, I always felt my job as a leader was to remove the obstacles for my team, right? I was the lineman, I was blocking, and the running back's the guy that's getting the glory, but I'll do the blocking as the leader to let the guy that is the specialist, cross into the end zone. And how do we do that, as leaders, that, to make it easy for our team to be successful? By not, the credit's not about us. We eliminate the bureaucracy best we can as the leaders, and then the program or whatever it is can be successful and they can actually score, right? That's kind of my view of how I view things, but yeah.
100%.
So obviously a super successful and interesting military career. And I was a SIGINT guy, so I can appreciate the work of NRO and what y'all did over there.
There we go.
So I did some time at NSA at Fort Meade, so I definitely get some of the programs you were working on over there. But again, learned a lot there, but always kind of had an eye on, I think, the commercial private sector. I mean, working at NRO is a place where you are doing cutting edge technologies, and you definitely have that civilian government overlap to stay ahead of the newest and latest and greatest in that world. How did you pivot? Or I guess maybe I'll ask you, what was your decision to leave the Air Force? Why leave? I mean, obviously you were doing great stuff and having a great successful career. Obviously you could look over the wall a little bit, probably, especially at a place like NRO, and maybe see other opportunities. What was kind of that calculus and transition, from the Air Force into the civilian sector like for you?
Yeah, I think it was definitely a more thought out more thought out action than getting to the academy. But it actually started. I think you kind of hit on it. It started in my senior year at the academy. When I finished playing football, it was like this void that was left, for where that was, and I was like, what can I do with my time, that I have, like. I want to learn about something new, and so then that kind of got me thinking, like, I love investing. I'm following the news, M&A news, XYZ. And so then, I didn't know what to do with that. Didn't know if that was even a job. I just used to follow it. And we had a banker that came into class one day. Daniel McBrome, it's still a great mentor to this day. He kind of came in and told us, funny story. He walked in purple suit, super nice, Gucci loafers, nice white, hair slicked back, got banker, similar banker looks. And he came into class and he's just like, hey, and we don't know who this guy is. He's just walking in, and he's different from most guest speakers at the Air Force Academy.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, what's this guy's deal? And he walks in, he's like, hey, my biggest problem is day to day. And we're like, no, we don't know who you are yet, but we'll sure you go. He says, at the time you could take pictures. They just started. You could take pictures of your checks and then deposit to your bank account. He's like, yeah, I keep doing that and it keeps missing my zeros. And we're like, what? We're like, wait, who is this guy?
Yeah.
What does he do? And so then he kind of described, hey, I'm, investment banker, deal with M&A, advisory. And I was just, captivated, since that conversation. And I asked him, like, hey, can I grab lunch to just kind of understand what you do? And so that led to then just the, 2-year long mentorship with him. And he was, well, I guess till today, but he was just kind of actively telling me, like, hey, here's what the job entails. If you really want to do this, here's what, here's what I do. And I had to go through, and like, you would need to do this. And so that really just got me interested, got the ball rolling, and kind of thought, like, hey, this is something I really would like to, just understand a little bit more about. And so that's then also led to the internship during 60 days. I was like, if I really, this is something that really interests me, I really want to put pen to paper, and prove out the thesis, And so then that summer ended up being more than what I thought was possible. And I just realized you could have such a tangible impact, a positive impact on people's lives through investing. And so, we did an oncology roll up, or the college roll up that I was finishing right when I got there. that then provided access to care for thousands of people across the Midwest. That's huge from those communities who you had to travel hours to get care, and sometimes that wasn't possible for financial restrictions or whatnot. And so I just thought like that piece of the pie was so interesting, and like that was something that would I could continue this line of service that I have from when I was little until now. And so that's kind of what originally got me interested in it. And then leading up, I was like, hey, how do I get there if this was even something I wanted to do? And that was through the MBA. And,
Yeah.
the MBA is kind of that quintessential pivot point where you kind of can switch careers, form and function. And so, and I was like, well, walk that back. How do I, what's the, how do you get an MBA? And so one of the tips that I'll give to anyone looking to make the transition, I just started reaching out.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most important things is you have to speak to people who've done it, not your commander. Your commander's always, want the best for you in life. It's just, you got to talk to the experts that, in this scenario. And so that's what I did. And lucky enough, I think a few of my friends, older classmates, they were thinking very similarly, and they had already gotten out, and they had gone to, Wharton, Harvard, and Columbia. And so I was like, hey, I was able to pick their brains, like, hey, is this, how does this all work? And so then I think that kind of came to crescendo when I was at NRO. I was like, hey, this is the time where, hey, do you want to do this or do you not? This is something that you're really interested in you. I don't know why. It's just like, hey, you're at the point where you have to make a decision. It's after the 5-year commitment. And
Yeah.
so that's when I spoke with my commander, who's probably the best leader, one of the best leaders I've ever met at the NRO. And so it was like, we talked about it, and he's like, hey, you've done great work for me. I'll support you on the way out. And so we kind of came up with a plan, and that's when I applied and was fortunate enough to get into Stanford. And so I think that's really what kind of spearheaded is getting into business school. And I can talk. I think that's probably the next time, but that is probably I think the real your ticket of entry into the private sector is through that MBA for a lot of us. And so I think that's kind of what originally started. Then everything that happened post Stanford was a mix of serendipity and a little bit of luck, and I think a little bit of hard work. But no, it was it's been a great ride so far. But happy to we can kind of hit
Yeah,
that
yeah, no,
pace.
and I do believe you make your own luck, right? I mean, there's a little bit of luck in there, but you have to be the right time, the right place, and you're working hard, and luck maybe a little piece of it, but you make your own luck. I just want to know if you got your own purple suit, by the way. So that's the real question. Did you ever get your own? As a
Yeah,
guy
I'll get it
that
later.
has a jacket business on the side, I can appreciate that. And I was just at Paisley Park last week and saw Prince's outfits. I'm like, I need some
Yeah,
more. I need to up my game a little bit, I think. So yeah, good stuff. No, that's awesome.
yeah,
And great to see you. I mean, you made it back to Stanford, right? That was in the running when you were looking at colleges and made
exactly.
it
It's
back
so funny how
there.
life works. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how that all works out, indeed. But yeah, I would love to talk about that again because I think for a lot of transitioning veterans, whether they are coming out enlisted and going back to college right away, or getting out as an officer and going back to getting your MBA. I mean, I think it's about a third of all transitioning veterans every year go back to college, go back to school in some way, shape, or form. I think it's an easy answer for a lot of enlisted guys. They don't know what they want to do. Like, I'm going to go back to college and figure it out, right? It's better than being on mom's couch. But certainly the MBA route is something that a lot of folks do. Again, and I think you're right. It is kind of that pivot point, that invest in yourself pivot point if you want to get into that new next career. But I would assume because of your career, I mean, it wasn't like you were not that being a pilot or infantry or intel is not. At least you were in somewhat a business related role in the Air Force. You probably had a little bit, I say a leg up, but you kind of had at least dabbled in that world more than most. And not that it's ever easy to learn accounting and a pain in the butt, but still, it probably is I say a smoother maybe transition to go to a place into get your MBA. But yeah, we'd love to kind of hear your experience of like what did you take? You're always like stacking experiences, right? So you had your experience at the academy, you had your experience active duty, and then next chapter was getting the MBA. What did you feel like that was what piece did that add to the puzzle for you to make you successful moving forward?
Yeah, I think and you hit on something I think is extremely important. Is about that transition period. I think, and that's what's something, and I'll talk a little bit more about our group, the club. But that was something that I was laser focused on. I was like, hey, what does that look like? How can I most efficiently make this transition? And I think a lot of that, even though you get into B school, which I think is probably the best path for most people that are separating, I've tried to convince everyone that if you're separating and you don't know what you want to do, the
Yep.
MBA is literally the perfect place. I mean, that's where most people go when they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Is go get an MBA. And so I think that's the first step. But then also once you get there, which I think helped me even more, is these internships. I think because that just gives you just such good insight into what you're doing, where you can actually decide, hey, this is something that I can pursue. I can't, is it even possible? Because you just learn a lot about not only the industry but yourself. And so when I got into, fortunate enough to get into Stanford, I also was fortunate enough to get an internship at Blackstone, which is the largest, alternative asset manager in the
Yeah.
world, trillion under management. And so that gave me an insight to, hey, what does mega fund private equity look like at a high level, over a summer. And I had it in one of the investing roles that are available as well in tactical opportunities, which is special situation investing. And so I just got to see like, okay, here's what I'm doing every day. I can learn a little bit more about this industry before when I go into Stanford. Now I'm armed with, two internships in private equity. I did a shorter one in venture capital for Scout Ventures. So now I have these three experiences that I can bring to bear once I get to the NBA. Now I have something to fight with,
Yeah.
essentially. And I think that's something that's very important when you're separating. Is like, hey, you're gonna have to take time, you know, post separation, whether that's through skill bridge or just getting out early, where you can go learn another industry, go at least get some experience in another industry. It just makes everything a lot easier. Not required, but it definitely smooths the road out that you're going to have to travel, especially if you're looking to get in any buy side or investing role. I think I could not have made this pivot without those experiences, especially. And then moving into the NBA, armed with those experiences, I think the NBA is like we talked about. It's just the most efficient medium to sort of transpose that military experience into business acumen, and,
Mhm.
and and you get the indication to the market, hey, this person's serious and can succeed in these roles. It takes it takes an MBA. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be an MBA, but the most efficient route is an MBA, and you learn that while you're there, and not necessarily through everything that you do learn, but it's through the classmates.
Yeah.
Your classmates learning what they do. Them being proponents, helping you through the interview process. Which it was like three or four of us were in a computer lab doing modeling tests. The first 4 months we were in school. That's just kind of what we had to do to get prepared for those interviews. But then on the other side, the NBA is a special, full time NBA is a special point in your career. 2 years is because of the recruiting,
Mhm.
because this is a point where, hey, all of the top elite professional services, the top firms are all coalescing in like these singular points where they're looking for you. And I think there's no real other equivalent moving, that you can go to professionally where you have that level of access to all of these firms. And like even after you leave, you don't have that access, as to a certain degree. And so I think those are the things that make the NBA special that I learned about. It's like, hey, I have access to these people. I got the ticket, to enter to enter the game of the private sector through the NBA, and now I'm armed with a group of I mean, obviously they're classmates, but became best friends, families. Going to be in their wedding, they're going to be in my wedding, and now you're armed with all of this to then go pursue whatever profession you really want.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really what the NBA is about and what has helped me. I think that's what's helped me the most. And once again, it wasn't all planned out, but it's a, I just kind of I talked to the right people who didn't explain to me, hey, go get your MBA and then do this. Don't, it's a lot harder to just go and do it.
Yeah, I think you're so the point you make is really I think spot on, right? I mean, the MBA itself, the learning you get, the accounting, the finance, that's fine, important. Don't get me wrong. You have to, that's just like table stakes for anything. You have to be able to speak the language of business, right? So it gives you the tools to speak the language, but the real value to the MBA, especially in person, is the network, right? I mean, it's the people you met, it's the alumni you get access to, it's the facilities you get access to, and again, I think that's we talk about on this show, and I talk with veterans all the time. And networking is that's how you get jobs, right?
Yeah.
Networking is how you move forward in this world. And I think, for you had your Air Force, Academy network, which is an awesome network in its own right. And then your active duty Air Force time. And then you stack on the MBA and the Stanford network, which is massive. And just, you put those all together. I mean, that is really the recipe to open doors, because you continue to grow and grow and grow and just cultivate that network. That's how you realize what's out there. Again, your network plus opportunity makes things come together, right? Because you never know when the job is going to be there, and the network usually kind of says, "Oh, but David's free right now. We have this thing," and that's just kind of how it works, But you have to be good about growing that network, right? I think that's one of the things I see with veterans often, especially guys that do like 20 years or do more time. They've lost a lot of their civilian network, right?
Yeah.
They're afraid. They think networking is a dirty word. I'm like, well, what do you think you did in the military? If you wanted to get something from the guy in supply, or you wanted to get your order squared away, you had a network. You could call the sergeant, you could call the master chief, and they would hook you up, right? That's networking. You may not call it that in the military, but that's what it is. Don't be afraid to do the same thing in the civilian world. You may call it something different, but that's what it is, And I think that has this, for whatever reason, networking has a negative connotation sometimes. I think for veterans, when they're getting out, like, oh, that's kind of, I can't do that. I need to do it on my own. Like, no, it's nothing wrong with it. You're just talking to your buddies and making sure that they know what you're doing, what skills you have. Because when they have that opportunity to say, oh yeah, let's call Bo, let's call David, and put them together and see if it's a fit, So it was great. I love to hear that, how you kind of continue to stack and grow and cultivate it. I mean, you maintain those relationships, from the academy, from your Air Force time, obviously from Stanford. I mean, that's what it's all about, and that's how you get to those next steps, is through that network. But I'd love to hear. So you're wrapping up your time with that network, and how that, and then what did that, once you finish your MBA, what choice did you make, or what path or how did you figure out where you were going to go from there?
No, I actually want to just hit a quick point on the
Yeah,
networking
for
piece,
sure.
because it is so important, and that maybe something I hopefully didn't de-emphasize. I mean, that is the crux of how all this even came about. I mean, just
Yep.
to give you an example, I mean, no one is. I mean, it's not just something, some people maybe just be intuitively good at it, but you have to practice, and I think that's what sort of disheartens some people, is just, hey, I'm calling a stranger to ask them for something, and I
Yep.
think that's it's very daunting for a lot of people, but I think the interesting piece is on the other side of that call is someone who wants to help you. And
Yeah.
so, like, especially from a veteran perspective, I mean, I say this all the time, is like, my academy network is not only the Air Force Academy, it's all three, is so strong because, there's a close to 100% chance that that person's going to pick up the phone.
Yep.
And it's the same for me. If anyone's like, it's going to be close to 100%. I'm going to find time somewhere in the future to connect with this person. And so I think that's sort of, I think the veterans should also go in with that mindset, like, hey, this is, like you said, this is another vet who's trying to help another vet. We have that same
Yep.
service, still ingrained. And so, the quick story about that is, the first person I reached out to, once again, I think this is also just those acts of serendipity that help you out. This was January, going in, like, of my senior year at the academy. I don't know anything about anything, about finance. I saw this guy. I'm on LinkedIn. I just made LinkedIn, for the first time,
Yeah.
and so I'm just looking, and so I see this guy. I was like, wait, he works at Goldman Sachs in the investment banking division. He was a academy grad, and he played on the football team,
Hmm.
and he was from Texas, like me. And I was like,
Huh.
this guy seems like the perfect person to talk to. And so I was like, well, I'll send him a message, see if he
Yeah.
responds, because that's what I've been told to do. Worst message ever. I don't even know. I think he probably thought it was endearing. And so we get on the call, and so once again, I don't know anything about anything. I'm like, we're talking. We still, and his name's Christian Evans, who is an incredible proponent and leader with ALG and just the Air Force Academy in general, and mentorship. Uh, I'm talking to him like, hey, can you give me an internship at Goldman Sachs? Over the next 3 months. I had no idea what Goldman Sachs was. He laughed, and I was like, I didn't think that was pretty. I didn't think that was funny. And like, no, I can't get you an internship at Goldman. And little did I know that that's one of the hardest internships to get in the world. People, and so it was just that naivety. I'm like, hey, I asked a very unintelligent question, but he just thought that was like, hey, he really wants it, because he doesn't really know what's going on, but he knows what he wants. And so, And I can always ask him, like, why did you help me after I asked you that? Like now knowing, calling that is interesting. But he was like, hey, I just saw that this was something that you were passionate about. And if I gave you, the right set of instructions, help, mentorship, I feel like you probably would get there. And like to this day, I was just like, I thank him because he got me that internship at Farrell's Capital in Dallas,
Hmm.
which then I met probably another mentor that has been critical to like my development, and that's kind of been the set of falling dominoes that landed me here
Yeah.
was off of that conversation with Christian. And me just asking a stupid question. And
Yeah.
so it just goes to show you, like, it's not going to be perfect at all, ever, the first time you do it. But I think just getting out there and getting the practice, it'll help you along the way. And he also helped me, hey, here's how you do these calls, here's, what you should do, and X, Y, Z. And so I just want to just emphasize that piece is probably the most important part of this. And like I like to say, flood the market, just
Yeah.
reach out as far as wide as you can get. Go find, anything interesting, and there's a vet involved with it, reach out to them. They're most, like I said, there's it's probably going to be a close to 100%. They're going to try to find some time or some way to help you.
No, I
Yeah.
love that. And again, it's so true. And again, I ran the veteran recruiting programs at Amazon for 7 years, right? So
Mm,
I got
yeah.
reached out to a lot. But to your point, though, if people reached out to me and just said, "Hey, I want a job," I'm like, I was not very likely to talk to them. It was like, "Hey, I'm transitioning. I'm interested in the culture of Amazon and how you got there." Well, then you have to be, to your point, you have to kind of ask in the right way. If you just come and say, "I need a job," like, well, dude, you haven't done your homework. I mean, be a little subtle, like that subtle, or just like not. It can't be just. I mean, yeah, I get you probably want a job if you've been asked about the culture, but let's talk about other things about why you're reaching out to me, and then maybe it's a little easier to connect. But just my food for thought on that one. But yeah.
100%. That's exactly true. And then do your research. I mean, the only reason I reached
Yes.
out to this guy is because we had all these things in common, which I
Yep.
laid out in the message, and then we talked about.
Do your
And
homework.
then
That's
the
smart.
ask was, I was like, hey, could you give me,
Yeah. Give
like,
me
how
more
do I get a job?
internship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which obviously would have done a lot different now.
Yeah.
But yeah, to your point, I mean, you have to put in the work ahead of time to
Yep.
understand, and it only gets, and like I said, that only gets better with practice. Once again,
100%. Yep.
and to the point where, yeah, now we got ChatGPT, they can spin you up anything,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's true.
But no, yeah, I 100% agree.
That's awesome. Well, but so how? What was the what did you when you're finishing up? Obviously, you probably had several opportunities when you're graduating from Stanford, I would assume. But how did you decide what you wanted to do as you were leaving from there? What was that process like for you?
Yeah, so I think once again it was just a lot of serendipity, after the internship at Blackstone, I was all prepared to go into investment banking because the general path was going investment banking, then to private equity, and so I was prepared to do that until I got the job at Blackstone, and then I'm talking to people at Stanford, and they were like, "Hey, is your end goal to be an investor?" And I was like, "Yes, that's really what I really want to do," and they were like, "Well, just go do that." And it was like it was mind blowing to me.
Okay,
Like,
yeah,
well,
right.
I didn't know that was
Can
an
I do that?
option.
Is that okay? Yeah, right.
And so I just kind of ran. I was like, well, that's why not. And so then I just full force recruiting into the private equity. As soon as I hit campus, second day of class, I was interviewing. I was just getting reps in. And like I said, we spent those first few months in the computer lab, a literal computer lab, going over model tests, financial models, the best way to build it. Building it in an hour, and it being perfect. And those were like the experiences. Like, hey, this is what I really want to do. And so I kind of knew going in I wanted to do private equity. I think how I got to Vista is an even more interesting point because it all goes back to this piece where, like, hey, you got to connect with people.
Yep.
One of my favorite books is Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi.
Yep.
Keith Ferrazzi, and what he talks about is it's this may be a better, more palatable for our veterans. Is like he doesn't like to use the word networking. He likes to use the phrase connecting,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of how I see it. And I was like, hey, just connecting with another person on some personal level, that you both can benefit from. And so I kind of use that term. And so there's like, hey, how can I connect with more people? Just to understand, like, hey, what does private equity mean? Is this transition even possible? What would their advice be? And that was kind of what I kind of reached out to a lot of people about. And so I got connected with, one very impressive woman who graduated from HBS. She was double Harvard, Harvard undergrad, and
Yeah.
so she worked at Vista. And I was just like, hey, just interested in your experience. She was involved with some of the fellowships I had done in the MBA, and I was just curious, kind of like how would she think about things. And so, and she was very helpful, And then I talked. I happened to work with someone else at Blackstone who then went to Vista. Before I got there, and so it was just all these different points. And then when it came down to it, they actually weren't even recruiting at Stanford,
Huh.
which is the funniest thing.
Yeah.
Not anything negative. It was just it's West Coast. It was hard to get people from the West Coast to come to the headquarters in Texas and whatnot. And so it was just interesting dynamic that I didn't even know about. But funny enough, that the initial person who I reached out to that went to Harvard and that was worked at Vista, she actually was in charge of the entire recruiting process.
Huh.
And so then it's just things like that where you're spreading a wide net where you don't even know what's going to happen. She didn't
Yeah.
even know that when I first met her. Because she was like, "Hey, we're going to throw your name into the recruiting process since obviously like we're not recruiting at Stanford." And so then that's kind of how I got into that process. But I will say that was sort of that serendipity. The other side of this is the fact that my last job in our role was actually software development.
Hmm.
And so I actually really got the software bug there. I was like, hey, this is really interesting how the world is being powered by software effectively. And so, and so then Vista Equity Partners, where I'm currently at, is we specialize in only investing in enterprise software. And so it's kind of just built up this knowledge base. I was like, hey, I could use a little bit of this in the investing side of the house. And then lastly, it was kind of this is quote by Robert Smith, which kind of really encapsulated a lot of this. Who's the founder of Vista Equity Partners? He said there's really two ways resources have moved across the planet. You know, one of them is warfare, and I was like, that's interesting. And he said the other one is M&A. And I
Hmm.
was like, wow, that's interesting. And so then I'm like, well, I tried one half of that coin. I would like to try the other
Yeah.
side. And so, it just kind of made sense to me. Like, hey,
Yeah.
if I get this would be a perfect place for me. One, got the software angle. Two, really love the founder and his story. Three, a lot of people I really like and admire and, work at the firm. And, this would be great. And so then, like I said, the coworker I had at Blackstone that moved there, he ended up just, helping me, just, hey, here's how you prepare for this interview, XYZ. And so I had those two people in my, obviously they didn't, push me through the interview
Yeah.
process, but
Yeah.
they were just in my corner. And had I not been reaching out and just trying to make these connections, would have completely missed them. And then, probably would have not gotten this, job, which has been an incredible learning experience. It actually hit 1 year yesterday,
That's
funny enough.
awesome.
And so, yeah, and so it just takes those conversations just to get there. And that's kind of what ended up happening throughout the MBA. It was just a series of really, putting in a lot of work, grinding, and then also on the flip side, just connecting with people, my classmates as well, but the broader industry, just reaching out like, hey, would anyone be, open to talk to me, understand? Like you said, not asking for a job, but like, hey, I really want to know your experience and get your advice on if
Yep.
you think this is something that would work for me. And that just opened up so many doors I didn't know was possible and really landed me here. So I will say it's a little bit more serendipitous than most things, just kind of how that process worked out. But put in a lot of work to get there, just to hopefully have the chance to be, to make it to the final round. But yeah, it was an experience, and kind of knew that's what I wanted to do.
That's awesome, man. You laid it out so well. I mean, you make your own luck, right? I mean, you put the time in, you worked your butt off, you got the reps in, and when the opportunity was presented itself, you were able to capitalize on it, right? That's it's when that opportunity hits, you have to be ready. If you're not prepared for the opportunity, it's going to pass by you and you're going to miss it. But doing the work, doing all the hard work, earning it every day allows you to be prepared when the opportunity comes by, because it can be a quick window to hit sometimes, when you're ready to move and the job is there and all the stars align. So if you're not prepared, a lot of people I think miss that because they aren't prepared for it, haven't done the homework, haven't done the investing, their time to be ready and prepared for that opportunity. That's great stuff. So what would you recommend? And I think I know some of it, but for someone that wants to get into the space that you're in, because there are a lot of veterans out there that are interested in, kind of more broadly private equity, venture capital. Maybe even don't know exactly what it is, but they think they know, or they're interested in
Yeah.
the space when they leave the military. what would you recommend for someone that, kind of, or things you wish you would have done differently, maybe, or kind of this, your take on, hey, if you want to get in this space, what's the most important thing, or a couple of the most important things?
Yeah, I think one is just planning. I think you need to understand what this is. I think that's one of the things that I talk to a lot of vets, that they don't understand what, like I said, it's a shiny object at PVC. Compensation's fairly decent, and so like, hey, like, that's what they're seeing. I'm like, hey, I think you really need to understand what this job entails. Number one, and that can be through a few different ways. One, like I said, we mentioned ChatGPT, but one of the things I recommend is just reading. I think the best book, if you're early in the journey, you've heard these buzzwords, you want to understand what any of this even means. I think the best thing to do is a book. Uh, sorry, a book that actually Air Force Academy grad uh, wrote, is the author of, Chris Crawford, and I'm sorry, Chris Howard, is Moneymakers. I think reading that book, it is such a beautifully laid out entry level into all of the private sector effectively. And I think, and I recommend that to all vets if they're thinking about separating, read this book, and then you kind of have a picture of the landscape. Because if you've been in the military, like you said, 5, 10, 15 years and have been poking your head up from a private sector perspective, you don't really know what's out there. And I think
Yeah.
that's the first way to do it out. So I recommend that book, and then from that, it'll lay everything at Atlanta, what consulting is, what investment banking is, private equity. It'll explain what all of this is, and then I think from there you're like, hey, this is interesting. I like these 4 things that he talked about, or they talked about in the book. I was like, then go to LinkedIn and go find someone in those industries that do whatever that piqued your interest. Find them, and then just like I said, just ask them like, hey, I read this book. I read this. It's very interesting to me. I would maybe consider doing it in the future. Would you be able to, lend some advice on how I can do that?
Yeah.
I think that if you lay it out like that, it shows, that you've done the work, that you've made it personable, that you're willing to learn. Once again, it's going to be close to 100% that hit rate that you're going to get a veteran to respond to you. You stack those up over a period of time. I think then you have an answer for like something that you just have a direction that you can go now, and you're definitely informed. And then I think the next piece of that is if you're separating and want to do this full time. I've already probably preached a little bit too much about it, but now it's time to look at just MBA programs. I think the full time, not the executive. I think is especially if you're less than 15 years in the military, which encompasses a lot of pilots. You know, think about that as a very efficient way to then now build out that thesis on whatever you found was interesting through the MBA, whether that's through talking to current students. Every veterans club at every school would love to talk to anyone, and then they can talk through their experiences. I would say then go through whatever services that you need to use to help apply. Salute to School is an incredible resource for veterans. Management Leadership for Tomorrow is another incredible resource for everyone that you can, if you qualify, can use, and just go through those. Ask the veterans that are at the business school the best ways to get to it, and I think then in business school, you'll have like you get the full aperture of what's available, and it's always funny. Veterans specifically have such a I mean, it's no fault of their own, but they have such a smaller myopic view of like what's available, and then you get to business school and you realize like everything, all these things in life are available. So then that way you learn what you want and kind of go from there. But even before, and then the last thing I'll say is separation planning is probably that is a critical time. Those 8 to 10 months where you're like you're ramping down, hopefully in your career in the military, and then you're going into skill bridge, or prior to you starting whatever you're going to do. I think it's imperative that you also test the thesis out there. Go get, I mean, skill bridge is I mean, that's what it's built for, is for you to ease into employment. So hey, go get an internship somewhere that that you read in whatever book or whoever you spoke with. Go try to get an internship in an industry. Learn what this means, because you may realize you don't want to do that. I
Yeah.
mean, funny enough, I had a classmate, a West Point classmate, that got one of the premier private equity internships, pre MBA, and realized it. private equity was not for him.
Yeah.
I mean, and he was gung ho about it, wrote it about in his essays getting the MBA, but he realized this is not something I want to do, and ended up, becoming an entrepreneur, and that was, tenfold better than him, being in PE, which, and we agreed on that,
Yeah.
for a lot of reasons. And so I think it's just, you just really need to build this experience, progression that, your constituents that have been in the private sector since undergrad, they've had, 5 to 8 years to go through. And I think you kind of got to condense that a little bit, and use that separation time, as the best way to do it. So that would be my recommendation moving forward. If you're a vet looking to even just get out the military, I think that's from what I've seen, has been the most efficient and effective way.
No, that's great. Man, again, I mean, as anyone in the military, we should be good planners, right? That's what we do. So make a plan. I think, so many people, though, and I see it all the time, wait till the last minute. They work, every second of every day till the last, until they're, and like, man, you gotta put your, pump the brakes a little bit on the way. I mean, I say this now, and I was one of the, I was the guy, I was in command when I retired. So like, you didn't have a chance to do some of those things, but that is the way, the 100%, the way you laid it out is the way people should do it if they can. And Skill Bridge too, man, it's such a great program. Again, we always called it, at Amazon, we loved it because it's a try before you buy program, right? And it goes both ways. It's a chance for you as the transitioning service member to evaluate that opportunity. Also a chance for the company to evaluate you, and both of you have a chance to say no to it. Hopefully it's something where you both like it. But again, it's better to know it then during those 12 weeks than to take the job and then be miserable later on. So it definitely is a huge opportunity that I think folks probably don't utilize as well as they should sometimes, to be candid. But yeah, it's great stuff. Great stuff. All right. So I mean, obviously you have made the transition. You were crushing it, loving life at Vista, doing great things. Anything else you'd like to share with the audience, or things you're involved with these days with veterans out there? I mean, it's kind of, as we wrap things up, what's kind of some closing words or thoughts from you?
Yeah. No, I think, outside of all of, the professional, um, movement, I think it's always been, just service has always been something that's near and dear to my heart, whether it's through when I was younger, just supporting my family, from that perspective, and then through sports where, I was a team captain on every football team I was a part of. I was like, hey, how can I best serve the team? And then, the military, obviously, but then as I got, older, and, was a little bit grew into the military, I was like, hey, how can I still go back to helping those communities that I was raised in? And so that was something that was very near to me. So I started helping out with fundraising, and that sort of led to, one side is, fundraising through the Reardon Programs Association, and then realizing that was, pretty fun. And so I started doing different things there, which then led me to, like, hey, how can I be an impactful investor in helping, fuel, making everyone's lives better. And so that's one piece of the other side. I think, two things on the nonprofit side that I'm really proud of is some of the work that I've done with Management Leadership for Tomorrow, which I mentioned earlier, MLT, great, incredible program that helps, kind of the underserved communities get these MBA, get into these top MBA programs. The the Twigo program, MBA fellowship, is an incredible, just incredible way to, pivot to finance as well. Put a plug out there for that. And then, I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but one of the things that really helped me was kind of this cohort of friends that I had, once I got out the military, and we were kind of thinking very similarly. Funny enough, we met at an event, at NBA conference, and we were talking, and we was like, it's 8 of us there that we didn't know all of us were, thinking about the NBA the same way. And so then we kind of created a group chat, and we're like, hey, how do we create a process so where we all just aren't, swimming alone, and, just trying to
Yeah.
find out this information. And so, it kind of, inadvertently created itself into an actual real life program. And so what we did is I took the charge. I was like, hey, I'm going to, if there's a perfect path to, from graduating to get into an MBA, and then, onward, what would that look like? And so then I kind of created this framework, kind of take everyone's input to help create this framework. And then we created, it was called the stratagem. And then we called ourselves the club. And so we then grew from that initial 8 to, I think it's right now like 26-ish people. And I mean, it's just been an incredible run. I mean, we've had at the point, I think 15 people who are currently have graduated in school or about to matriculate. And these 15 range from, I think we've had, I think we had most go to Wharton. I think we had like 5 or 6 people go to Wharton. I think we've had 2 go to HBS, 2 go to Stanford GSB, a few go to Columbia Business School, and so Duke Fuqua. I mean, we at MIT, Booth. I mean, it's been, we were never expecting it to be successful as it was, and so that's something that is super, and that's probably one of my most proudest accomplishments in life is being a part of that group and helping and usher in this Air Force Academy cohort. And now that we've realized this is a really effective process, we're trying to open it up, for the Air Force Academy, but then also to the broader academy and veteran networks as well. But that's been, sort of a passion project that's been super critical. One to, kind of my just overall happiness, but it's just been such a reward. Helping people, get to, kind of realizing where I was at senior year, like, what does this even mean?
Yep.
And then helping them, sit down. I just got a message 2 days ago. Someone got a full-time, job, just graduating, and got a full-time job, on the buy side and an investing role. And it's just so incredible to see this person who, funny enough, I was a sophomore and he was a freshman in 39, and I
Wow.
got to see that growth to now. He's going into investing roles and going to make the world a better place. And I think I mentioned one last thing. When I had my original visit to the Air Force Academy as a senior in high school, my host, who was a senior at the academy, Wale Lawal, Harvard dual degree, master's and business school, who just graduated, has one of the hottest startups, Mesa Quantum. He was my host. And so then
Huh.
we started the club together, inadvertently. And then now we applied to business school together, and then we ended up graduating together. And so I think it's just kind of full circle moments like that, where it's just like that's the real thing I really enjoy.
That is awesome, and again, I think you're spot on in that once you've made it, so to speak, or gone through the process, obviously people helped you get to where you are. Now it's time to send the elevator back down and help them out. And I really, I mean, I try. I spend a lot of time talking to transitioning veterans. I mean, I'm in the veteran hiring space, obviously, and I get so much more out of helping folks and seeing them be successful. It just makes you feel good. I mean, it's because you know what you struggled with, and if you can help them in some small way to just relax, come, it's going to be all right. I was a knucklehead too, and I figured it out. You're going to be great. Just give a little confidence, and then you give them a little rudder, make a couple connections for them, and then let them go, and then see them flourish, and then you're so appreciative, and you get so much back from it when you see those people be successful. Man, I didn't do anything. You did it all the work. I gave you a little bit of direction, and you took it from there. I didn't do much at all, and the people are so appreciative of that. It just makes you feel, that give back factor is huge in that. So love that you're doing that, and that the club is hopefully going to continue to grow and thrive and expand beyond what it is today. And man, it's been just a pleasure talking to you, David, and love your passion and love your the thoughts you have. Clearly, the experience you had in the military has made you, or made a huge part of you being successful where you are today. And I can't wait to see what the future holds, man. It's just the future's bright, and I love to see what you're doing and giving back, and it's awesome stuff. So thanks again for being on the show today. Appreciate it.
No, thanks again for having me, Bo. I mean, like, I feel, just truly, truly thankful that I'm even mentioned in the same breath as anyone else has been on the podcast, and with you as well. So thanks again for having me on. Really, really made my day today.
Hoorah. Sounds great. Have a good one. We'll talk to you soon. Out here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode. For more content, follow us on Instagram @TheMilitaryVet or on LinkedIn. Join us at an upcoming event or learn more on our website, TheMilVet.org. Feel free to email us directly at leadership@TheMilVet.org. Thank you so much and take care.